My children hoped my health would fail, so they stopped taking me to my appointments. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated my doctor. This is the true story of how we rewrote their future in a single afternoon, and the lesson they learned is one you will never forget. My children hoped I would die, so they stopped taking me to my doctor's appointments. That is not an exaggeration. It is the simple, cold thesis of my story. They believed my silence was the precursor to my surrender. The quiet hum of the air conditioner in this Santa Fe house, once a sound of comfort, had become the soundtrack to their patient waiting game. But they forgot one simple truth about the quiet ones. The women of my generation who were taught to endure our memories are long, and our friendships are forged in steel. They forgot about Dr. Arthur Vance. He was not just my cardiologist. He was the man who held my husband Robert's hand as he passed from this world to the next. A man who understood that a promise made to the dying is a sacred debt. In a single afternoon in the quiet sanctuary of his office, Arthur helped me rewrite the future they had so arrogantly assumed was theirs. In the end, they were not just cut off. They were erased, not with the fury of a storm, but with the silent, undeniable finality of a signature on a page. People like them, my son Mark and his wife Jessica. They live in a world of loud declarations and transient feelings. They mistake stillness for weakness and patience for incompetence. They saw me, Eleanor, sitting in my armchair with my book, and they saw a relic, a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. They heard my quiet requests for the low sodium broth my heart required and heard only the grating sound of an inconvenience. They saw the life I had built, the security I had provided them from the sale of my own home in Albuquerque, not as a gift, but as their birthright, a fund they were merely waiting to fully inherit. They called my condition a drain, a burden, a problem that time they hoped would solve for them. They forgot that the woman they called a burden was the same woman who had balanced the books for Robert's construction company for 30 years, who understood that a contract, whether written or spoken, has terms. The term of my generosity was respect. They had defaulted on the loan. What they failed to comprehend is that silence is not an absence of thought. It is a space where thought sharpens into a blade. Every missed appointment, every forgotten prescription, refill every sigh of exasperation from Jessica as she bought the cheap milk instead of the one I needed, was not just a moment of neglect. It was a piece of evidence. And I, the quiet woman in the corner, was the most meticulous archivist they would ever know. This is not a story about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion, and what I felt was the cold, clean precision of clarity. This is a story about consequences. It is a lesson in the true definition of ownership, a reminder that you cannot possess what you do not value. They thought they owned the house. They thought they owned my future. But in the end, all they owned was the silence that answered their desperate, frantic calls. This house, with its terracotta tiles that glowed like embers in the evening sun, and its sweeping view of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, was meant to be my final sanctuary. It was never meant to be my quiet prison. I remember standing on this very patch of high desert land 10 years ago. My late husband, Robert, had only been gone a year, and the grief was still a raw, physical presence. The life insurance money, the sum total of his 40 years of hard labor under the New Mexico sun, sat in my bank account not as a comfort, but as a heavy, unmooring stone. My son Mark stood beside me, his arm around his new wife Jessica. Her eyes, wide and ambitious, were scanning the empty lot, but they were not seeing dirt and sagebrush. They were seeing recessed lighting and a state-of-the-art kitchen. They were seeing a life they could not afford. "We'll take care of you, Mom," Mark had said, his voice thick with a sincerity I mistook for character. His hand on my shoulder felt warm, solid. "You'll never have to worry about a thing. You can live with us. We'll be a family." A family. That word was a balm on the wound of my loneliness. I sold my own home in Albuquerque, the small adobe house that Robert and I had built with our own hands, the house where every scratch on the floorboards told a story. I took the entire proceeds from that sale and the lion's share of Robert's insurance and handed them a check for the down payment on this grander, emptier place. It was a check that covered more than half the purchase price. I didn't ask for my name to be on the deed. It felt transactional, unseemly. A mother does not act as a landlord to her only son. I was not investing in property. I was investing in a promise. I believed that my sacrifice was the foundation upon which they would build our shared future, a future where I would be cherished, protected, and cared for. I was a mother, and I trusted the echo of that promise long after the words themselves had faded into the thin mountain air. I see now that they viewed my contribution not as a gift, but as an entitlement. It was the entry fee for the life they believed they deserved. And I, in their eyes, was simply the ticket they had to punch to gain admission. They did not see a grieving widow seeking solace. They saw a walking bank account, a temporary inconvenience who held the key to their aspirations. The love I offered was not a bond, but a resource to be exploited until it was fully depleted. I remember Jessica's smile that day, a quick, bright flash that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of a victor, not a daughter. And I, wrapped in the fog of my grief and hope, chose to see only the promise, not the price. It was a mistake that would cost me 10 years of my life. The change was not a sudden storm, but a slow, creeping frost. Harm doesn't always arrive with a slammed door or a raised voice. Sometimes it seeps in through the quiet moments, in the things left undone, in the needs quietly ignored. It began, as so many family conflicts do, in the kitchen. The organic almond milk my cardiologist, Dr. Vance, had insisted upon for my heart health was the first casualty. 1 week it was there. The next, it was replaced by a jug of cheap, whole dairy milk. When I mentioned it, Jessica let out a theatrical sigh, her back to me, as she polished a wine glass. "It's just so expensive, Eleanor." She said the words hanging in the air like a judgment. It wasn't about the cost. It was about establishing control. My health was a luxury they were no longer willing to afford. Soon after, the thermostat became a battleground. After a particularly cold January night where I dared to nudge the temperature from 67 to 69 degrees, a clear plastic lockbox appeared over the controls the next day. The key, I was informed, was kept with Mark for efficiency reasons. My comfort was now subject to his permission. Then came the insidious neglect of my medication. My 7-day pill organizer, which I used to fill myself but now struggled with due to the tremor in my hands, was once a ritual Mark helped me with. Then it became a task he forgot. Soon the full bottles were simply left on the highest shelf of the pantry, a shelf I could not reach without a stepladder I was forbidden to use. Each morning, I had to ask to remind to feel like a beggar for the pills that kept my heart beating. I was becoming a ghost in the narrative of my own life. They talked around me, their plans for the weekend unfolding, as if I were a part of the inanimate scenery. My favorite armchair, the one Robert had bought for me, was moved to a darker corner of the room to make space for Jessica's new Peloton bike. It was the slow, methodical process of erasure. They never shouted. They never had to. They simply chipped away at my presence, my needs, my identity, one small, deliberate act of quiet neglect at a time, until I was little more than a whisper in the house I had built. They were sanding me down, grain by grain, hoping I would simply disappear. The phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon, its cheerful chime a jarring intrusion into the strained silence of the house. I picked up the receiver of the landline, the one tucked away in my room. "Eleanor, it's Carol, from Dr. Vance's office." The voice was bright, professionally pleasant, but I could hear the question mark hanging at the end of her sentence. "We just wanted to check in. We missed you for your 3-month cardiology follow-up yesterday. Is everything all right?" I glanced through my open door down the hall to the living room. I could see Jessica feet up on the ottoman I had needle-pointed years ago, scrolling through her phone a world away. She hadn't forgotten the appointment. She had deliberately ignored it. "Oh, my dear," I said, forcing a light, airy tone I didn't feel. "You know how it is. It completely slipped my mind. We've just been so busy here." The lie felt like a stone in my throat. For a moment, I felt shame. Not anger, not even sadness. Just the quiet, aching kind of shame that makes you feel like a fool for having trusted, for having to cover for those who should be protecting you. A few hours later, the phone rang again. This time there was no cheerful receptionist. It was the deep, familiar voice of Dr. Arthur Vance himself. There was no pretense. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and serious. "Robert made me promise to look out for you. Your prescription for the beta blockers hasn't been refilled in over a month, according to the pharmacy records. You missed your appointment yesterday. Talk to me. What's going on?" His directness was a kindness, but it was one I wasn't ready to accept. To speak the truth out loud would be to make it real, to give shape to the monstrous reality that my own son was complicit in a plan to let me fade away. The shame was still too strong. "Arthur, I'm fine." I whispered the words, catching in my throat. I've just been feeling a bit tired. I'll call Carol and reschedule. I promise." My voice cracked on that last word, betraying the lie. I hung up the phone before he could press further, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was not over. I had just put a sentinel on high alert, and they had no idea. The house was dark, shrouded in the deep, star-pricked blackness of a New Mexico night. I had gotten up for a glass of water, my joints aching with a familiar stiffness, a complaint brought on by the persistent cold they insisted on keeping in the house. The only light was a thin yellow blade slicing the darkness from under their bedroom door. As I shuffled past my slippers, silent on the cold tile, I heard their voices. They were low, conspiratorial murmurs, but the plaster walls of this house I had paid for were thin, and their words carried with perfect, devastating clarity. "She missed another one," Mark said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a dull, flat report. "My son." Jessica's reply was a sharp, venomous hiss, the sound of a snake striking in the dark. "Good. The less Vance sees her, the better. No doctors, no questions, no paper trail." A paper trail. The phrase hung in the air. This wasn't just passive neglect anymore. This was active concealment. There was a pause. I could hear the rustle of sheets as one of them shifted in bed. Then Mark spoke again, his voice laced with a pathetic, whining tone I recognized all too well. "It's a drain, Jess. This whole situation is a drain. The special food, the prescriptions. What if she just gets worse?" Jessica's voice dropped even lower, becoming a purr of cold, pragmatic poison. "It would be simpler for everyone, Mark. So much simpler. Simpler." That single word echoed in the silent, freezing hallway and settled in my soul like a shard of ice. It was the moment the last flicker of hope died. They were not just neglecting me. They were not just hoping for an outcome. They were cultivating it. My decline was not a fear they held. It was a solution they were actively working towards. The cold I felt then had nothing to do with the thermostat. It was the chilling, absolute certainty that I was sleeping under the same roof as my own executioners. They were just waiting for nature with a few nudges from them to do the job. And in that moment, standing in the dark, I was no longer a mother. I was a strategist. The rescheduled appointment was for a Tuesday morning at 10. It was not just a routine checkup. It was critical. Dr. Vance wanted to discuss the results of my latest Holter monitor test, the one I had worn for 48 hours, to track the erratic fluttering in my chest. After my phone call with him, I had circled the date on the kitchen calendar in bold red ink. It was a silent declaration. This one will not be missed. I reminded Mark on Sunday as he was watching a football game. He nodded a brief, distracted motion, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Got it, Mom," he mumbled. I reminded Jessica on Monday morning as she was blending a green smoothie. She gave me a brittle, fleeting smile. "Of course, Eleanor. We haven't forgotten." On Tuesday morning, I was dressed and ready by 8 o'clock, my coat folded neatly, my purse in my lap. I sat in my armchair and waited. 9 o'clock came and went. The house was quiet. At 9:30, I heard the shower running in their master suite. At 10 o'clock, the exact time of my critical appointment, Jessica emerged from her wing of the house. She was dressed in sleek black yoga pants and a matching top, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, a flicker of something annoyance triumph in their depths. Then she arranged her face into a mask of manufactured sympathy. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness so false it was acidic. "I am so sorry. A huge last-minute deadline just came up for Mark at work, an absolute crisis, and I have a commitment I just can't break." She gestured to her yoga attire as if it were a surgeon's scrubs. "We'll just have to reschedule. I'll call them this afternoon." She didn't look at me as she said it. Her gaze was fixed on a point on the wall just over my left shoulder. Mark, the son for whom this crisis had supposedly emerged, never came out of his office at all. The lie was so thin, so insultingly transparent, so profoundly cruel in its laziness, that it was no longer an excuse. It was a statement. It was a final, unambiguous declaration that my life, the very beating of my heart, was less important than a yoga class. And that was the final straw. I sat perfectly still in my armchair, my purse still in my lap, long after the sound of Jessica's luxury SUV faded down the street. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was absolute, a vacuum where the last remnants of my hope had been. For months, perhaps even years, I had been swimming in a murky sea of self-doubt and shame, asking myself the same question over and over: what had I done to become such a burden? I had analyzed every word, every action, wondering if I was too demanding, too present, too much of a ghost from a past they wanted to forget. But in that moment, in the wake of her insultingly transparent lie, the waters cleared. The sediment of my self-blame settled, and I could see the bottom. I saw the truth with a brilliant, painful clarity. It was not my fault. It was their design. They were not forgetful children struggling to cope. They were patient predators. They saw my love not as a gift, but as a liability. They saw my life not as something to be cherished, but as a final obstacle standing between them and the full inheritance of my legacy. The dull ache of sadness that had been a constant companion in my chest did not disappear. It transformed. It crystallized into something hard, cold, and perfectly, beautifully clear. It became resolve. Motherhood is not a contract for endless forgiveness. Love is not a license for abuse. I had been a mother. I had been a benefactor. I had been a quiet, steady presence they had taken for granted. But I was done. I was not a victim waiting for the end. I was not a frail old woman to be managed and erased. I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had buried a husband, raised a son, and built a life from love and hard work. I was a woman who had simply forgotten her own strength. And they, in their breathtaking arrogance, had just given me the perfect reason to remember it. My hand did not shake as I walked to my bedroom and picked up the receiver of the old cream-colored landline phone, the one that sat on my bedside table gathering dust, because they only use their cell phones. My fingers, though stiff with the familiar complaint of arthritis, dialed the number from memory. It was not the number for Dr. Vance's office. It was his private line, a number he had scribbled on the back of a business card and pressed into my hand the day Robert died. For anything, Eleanor. Anything at all, he had said. I had never used it. Until now. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. Dr. Vance. Arthur, I said. My voice was as calm and steady as a frozen lake. There was no tremor of fear, no hint of tears. The time for that was over. It's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance. Using my full married name, a name I hadn't used in conversation for years, felt like putting on a piece of armor. It was a reminder to myself and to him of who I was. I need to see you. Today. And it's not just about my heart. I took a breath. I need a witness, and I need a friend. There was no hesitation on his end, no question. Just the immediate, unwavering loyalty of a man who understood duty. Where are you? Eleanor, are you safe? I'm on my way. A wave of gratitude so sharp it almost brought tears washed over me, but I held my ground. This had to be done on my terms. No, I said firmly. Don't come here. They cannot know I have contacted you. They cannot see your car in this driveway. Just tell me what to do. I will do whatever you say. He understood immediately. The strategist in him, the man who diagnosed not just illnesses, but situations, took over. All right, Eleanor. Listen carefully, he said. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the comforting, solid ground of a true ally beneath my feet. I was no longer a ghost. I was a general receiving my orders. Arthur was a man of quiet, decisive efficiency. There will be a black Lincoln from Santa Fe executive cars at the end of your street in 1 hour. He instructed, his voice a calm command center. The driver's name is Miguel. He has been instructed not to come directly to the house. Just walk to the end of the cul-de-sac and meet him. It was not a taxi. It was not an ambulance. It was a statement of dignity, a clear signal that I was a person of value, being treated with respect. His choice was deliberate, and I understood it completely. I went to my room, my movements now filled with a purpose that had been absent for years. From the back of my closet, tucked away behind a stack of old photo albums, I pulled the worn leather portfolio Robert had given me. It contained the entire architecture of my life on paper. Inside was my marriage certificate, Robert's death certificate, a copy of my original will, and the thick sheaf of closing papers from the purchase of this house. And there on top was the most important document of all, the deed of title, bearing one name. Mine. Paper doesn't forget. People do. I packed the portfolio carefully into my large handbag, along with my wallet and my remaining heart medication. Before I left, I walked into the gleaming kitchen, a space that had become a silent battleground of passive aggression. I took a bright yellow Post-it note from the dispenser on the counter. In neat, clear script, I wrote 2 words: "Went for a walk." I stuck it to the stainless steel refrigerator, a small, cheerful flag of defiance in enemy territory. It was the same kind of dismissive, incurious note they would have left for me. Then, without a tremor, without a single backward glance at the home that had become my prison, I walked out the front door and into the bright, cold New Mexico sun. I did not run away. I was making a strategic retreat. The ride into the city was silent. I watched the blur of juniper and pinon flash by the tinted windows of the Lincoln, feeling not like a fugitive, but like a prisoner of war being liberated. The driver, Miguel, a quiet man with kind eyes, said nothing. He simply drove. He dropped me at the discreet back entrance to Arthur's medical clinic, a service alley I never knew existed. Arthur was waiting for me, just inside the door, his face etched with a gravity that went far beyond professional concern. This was the face of a friend bearing witness to a betrayal. He led me not to a sterile examination room, but to his personal office, a warm sanctuary, paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books. It smelled of old paper and quiet wisdom. But first, he was a doctor. He wrapped the cuff around my arm and took my blood pressure. His expression tightened. He took it again. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, quiet anger. 190 over 105, Eleanor. He said, his voice gentle but firm. This isn't just stress. This is what we call sustained, willful neglect. They are actively endangering your life. Hearing him say it, hearing the truth I had lived with in silence, articulated by a man of medicine, a man of science, broke the dam of my composure. I didn't sob. I didn't wail. A single hot tear slid down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, molten relief. It was the validation I didn't know I so desperately needed. I was not imagining it. I was not losing my mind. I was not crazy. I was being harmed. And that acknowledgement gave me back my footing. That single tear was a baptism, washing away the last of the shame and leaving only the hard, clean stone of my resolve. The time for sorrow was over. The time for action had begun. After I composed myself, I opened my large handbag and laid the worn leather portfolio on Arthur's polished mahogany desk. The soft thud it made seemed to echo in the quiet room. "They think I'm a fool, Arthur," I said, and my voice had regained its steel. "They think age has softened my mind, that I'm a dottery old woman who doesn't remember what she had for breakfast." I slid the first document across the desk. It was the deed of title for the house in Santa Fe. "They have forgotten that Robert and I were meticulous. That house is in my name, solely. I funded it and I own it. They are guests." Next, I produced a copy of my will, drafted 5 years prior, shortly after I moved in with them. I pointed to a specific clause, my finger steady. It left the house and a significant trust fund, the remainder of Robert's legacy, to Mark. But it was conditional. I had my lawyer at the time add a simple trusting phrase, "with the full faith and expectation that he will provide for the care and comfort of his mother, Eleanor Vance, for the remainder of her natural life." In clear, calm detail, I recounted the whispers in the hallway, the locked thermostat, the forgotten medications, and the final blatant lie about the missed appointment. I presented my case not as a heartbroken mother, but as a plaintiff laying out an argument. Arthur read the clause, his eyes scanning the page. Then he read it again, slowly, He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of profound sadness and cold fury. "They have broken the covenant, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and firm. "This isn't just a moral failure. They have violated the explicit spirit and intent of a legal document. They have broken the contract." He was right. It was a covenant, a sacred agreement between a mother and her child memorialized in ink. They had not just been unkind, they had been unlawful. And in their greed, they had given me the very weapon I needed to undo them. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, the concerned physician's face replaced by the focused, calculating expression of a strategist. The room was no longer a doctor's office. It was a war room. "My personal attorney, David Corbin, is one of the sharpest estate lawyers in New Mexico," he said, his voice now crisp and tactical. "But more importantly, he's a man of unshakable integrity. Last year, I helped his wife through a very difficult illness. He'll see this as more than just a favor. He'll see it as a matter of justice." Arthur picked up the phone on his desk, his movements economical and precise. He dialed a number from memory. "David," he said, dispensing with all pleasantries. "I have Eleanor Vance here with me. Yes, Robert's Eleanor." He paused, listening. "I need you in my office as soon as you can get here. We are doing a complete overhaul of her estate, and we are doing it today." He hung up the phone, and his eyes met mine. The look in them was a promise. "He'll be here in 20 minutes, Eleanor." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "We are going to build a fortress around you, a fortress of paper and law so meticulously constructed that they can never breach it. They wanted a paper trail to disappear. We will give them a paper trail that buries them." In that moment, I understood the power of a true ally. It wasn't just about friendship. It was about competence. It was about having someone in your corner who knew which walls to build and which levers to pull. I had been isolated, made to feel helpless. But I was not alone. The quiet woman they had tried to erase was about to become a legally binding fact they could never again ignore. David Corbin was everything Arthur had promised, sharp-eyed, empathetic, and ruthlessly efficient. He entered the office, shook my hand firmly, and then listened. He listened without interruption as I laid out the last 10 years of my life, his pen gliding silently across a yellow legal pad, documenting every detail of the slow eraser. When I finished, a profound silence filled the room. David looked not at me, but at Arthur, a silent communication passing between them. "This is elder abuse, plain and simple," David said, his voice a low, controlled rumble of professional outrage. "We have grounds for more than just a new will, Eleanor. We could pursue criminal charges." I held up my hand, a gesture that surprised me with its steadiness. "No," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I don't want a public fight. I don't want to see my son in a courtroom. I don't want revenge." I looked him directly in the eye. "I want clarity. I want peace. And I want consequences. Quiet, permanent, undeniable consequences." David nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on his face. He got it. For the next hour, we worked. With surgical precision, David dismantled the architecture of my old life and built a new one. The new will was simple and ironclad. The house in Santa Fe upon my passing was to be sold with the entire proceeds donated to the cardiology wing of St. Vincent Regional Medical Center in the names of Robert and Eleanor Vance. The significant trust fund, once destined for Mark and Jessica's comfortable future, was now bequeathed in its entirety to a local charity I had long admired, the Adelante Shelter for Women and Children. My son and his wife would not see another dime. Lastly, with a flourish of my pen, I signed a new, durable power of attorney and a healthcare directive naming Dr. Arthur Vance as my sole proxy in all matters medical and financial. My signature on that document was a declaration of independence. I was no longer their responsibility, and more importantly, I was no longer their asset. When the last document was signed and notarized, Arthur turned to me, his professional demeanor softening. "You can't go back there, Eleanor," he said, and his tone left no room for argument. "Not even for a night. That house is a threat to your health." For a fleeting moment, panic flickered within me. The thought of a sterile hotel room, of being an imposition, surfaced out of old habit. He seemed to read my mind. "I have a place in mind," he said, already reaching for his phone. "It's called Casa de Sol. It's a top-tier independent and assisted living community, not a nursing home. They have a full medical staff on site 24/7. I know the director personally. They keep a private suite reserved for situations just like this for people who need a safe harbor on short notice." He made the call. There was no pleading, no negotiation. It was a conversation between professionals arranging a solution. An hour later, after David had secured my original documents in his office, safe, Arthur drove me there himself. I walked into a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment with a private balcony that overlooked a courtyard filled with the impossible colors of blooming desert roses. It was furnished with tasteful, solid furniture. It smelled of lemon polish and clean linens. It was warm, and most importantly, it was quiet. Not the heavy, oppressive quiet of my former home, but a peaceful, gentle quiet. That night, tucked into a clean, comfortable bed with crisp, cool sheets, I didn't dream of the past. I didn't toss and turn with the ghosts of whispers in the hallway. For the first time in what felt like a decade, I simply slept, wrapped in a profound and unfamiliar sense of absolute safety. I was no longer a guest. I was no longer a burden. I was home. I spent a week at Casa de Sol in a state of quiet healing. I spoke with no one from my old life. I didn't have to. I had delegated the battle to my generals Arthur and David, and I trusted them completely. My only job was to rest, to eat the nutritious meals that were brought to my door, and to feel the warmth of the sun on my face as I sat on my private balcony. On the 8th day, a Tuesday, David called me. His voice was calm and professional. "Eleanor," he said, "I wanted to inform you that the letter has been sent via certified mail. The tracking shows it was signed for and delivered at 11:02 a.m. this morning." I imagined the scene, the mail carrier at the door, Jessica, signing for the crisp legal envelope with an air of annoyance, thinking it was some solicitation. I imagined her slitting it open with one of her long, manicured fingernails. The letter was a masterpiece of cold, legal precision. It did not speak of betrayal or neglect. It did not mention missed appointments or whispers in the dark. It was devoid of emotion. It simply stated that the sole legal owner of the property located at their address, a Ms. Eleanor Vance, had retained the services of his firm. It informed them that they were being served a formal notice to vacate the premises within 60 days, as the owner intended to list the property for immediate sale. Attached to this notice was a notarized copy of my new legally binding durable power of attorney naming Dr. Arthur Vance as my sole proxy in all matters medical and financial. This attachment was David's masterstroke. It was a silent, elegant checkmate. It made it perfectly clear that any attempt to contact me to plead to manipulate me regarding my health or my finances would be utterly futile. They would not be speaking to a mother they could guilt, but to a doctor and a lawyer who had a file full of their transgressions. There was no room for argument. There was no loophole. It was a wall of paper and law, and it was impenetrable. They were, in a word, finished. The peaceful silence I had cultivated was shattered the next afternoon. My small, simple cell phone, a device I rarely used, began to vibrate incessantly on the bedside table. It was a frantic, insistent buzzing, like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. I picked it up and looked at the screen. Mark. The name glowed with a desperate urgency. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, it buzzed again. Jessica. I silenced it, then Mark again, then Jessica. The screen lit up with the iconic notification of a Siege 99+ missed calls. Then came the voicemails. Curiosity, cold and detached, compelled me to listen. I played Jessica's first. Her voice was not the smooth, controlled purr I was used to. It was a hysterical, ragged shriek. "Eleanor, what is this? What have you done? This is some kind of horrible mistake. You have to call this lawyer and fix it. You can't just kick us out. This is our home." Our home. The arrogance was breathtaking. Then I listened to Mark's. His was a pathetic, wheezing plea, the voice of a cornered coward. Mom, please pick up. We're so sorry. We got the letter. We can fix this. We love you, Mom. We love you." That word love from his lips now held no meaning. It was just a tool, a key he was trying to jam into a lock I had already changed. I listened to both messages once and then a second time, not out of any emotional turmoil, but as a clinician might listen to a case study. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even the faint echo of a mother's pain. There was just a vast, quiet emptiness where my love for them used to be. The space had been cauterized, leaving behind only clean, sterile scar tissue. I calmly opened my contacts, selected their numbers one by one, and pressed the block option. The silence that returned was no longer a weapon used against me. It was a shield I had forged myself. 3 months passed. The 60-day notice expired. According to a brief final update from David, Mark and Jessica vacated the property without a fight, leaving it in a state of disarray that spoke volumes about their character. The house was sold within a week to a young family from California who fell in love with the view of the mountains. The money from the sale and the full balance of Robert's original trust fund were now in a portfolio of secure income-generating accounts that I alone controlled, managed by a quiet, competent financial advisor David had recommended. I now sit on the balcony of my permanent suite at Casa de Sol. It is morning. The air is cool and smells of desert rain from an overnight shower. My coffee is warm, and it does not taste bitter anymore. I have friends now, a true chosen family. There is Margaret, a retired history professor from Chicago, with a wicked sense of humor. There is Sophia, a painter, whose hands are gnarled with arthritis, but who still creates canvases of breathtaking color, and Lyda, a woman who has stories of escaping a dictatorship in her youth that would make mine pale in comparison. We play a vicious game of canasta on Thursdays. We go to the symphony matinees at the Lensic. We talk about books and politics and the absurd, beautiful, painful lives we have lived. We are a cohort of women who have been underestimated, overlooked, and who have survived. I was no longer waiting by the phone for a ride that would never come. I was no longer a ghost in a cold house. I was the master of my own time, my own health, and my own hard-won peace. I didn't lose a son. I lost the illusion that he had ever truly seen me as his mother. And in losing that illusion, I found myself. If you are listening to my story, if my words have found you in a quiet room where the silence feels heavy and the air is thick with things left unsaid, then I want you to listen closely. If you have ever been made to feel that your health is an inconvenience, that your needs are a burden, that your very presence is a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be cherished. Know this, you are not invisible. We, the quiet ones, the women who were taught to keep the peace at all costs, are a mighty nation. Your worth is not measured by your utility to others. It is inherent. It is absolute. They may hope your silence means surrender. They may mistake your patience for weakness and your age for incompetence. Let them. Let them forget who held the deed, who signed the checks, who built the very foundation they so arrogantly stand upon. Let them forget, because you must remember. You must remember that your life is your own. The final chapter is not theirs to write. It belongs to you. Do not wait for them to hand you the pen. Pick it up yourself. Do not wait for their permission to seek care, to find joy, to build a sanctuary for your own soul. Your love is not a contract for your own erasure. And your legacy is not a treasure for them to plunder. It is a garden for you to tend. And it can be filled with a peace so profound, so complete, it silences all the whispers in the world. Remember yourself. It is the one act of rebellion they will never see coming. Thank you for watching. Her Quiet Revenge. True stories. If this story stirred something in you, something that whispered, "I thought I was the only one," then I invite you to become a part of our community. Don't forget to subscribe to Her Quiet Revenge. True stories, and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a testament from the women the world tried to outgrow. Your voice matters here.